Yes, push the recording button. So welcome to the webinar. Richard is starting every minute, but a little bit about today's webinar. So we are going to discuss how to get started with OKRs, because whenever you want to start to drive like bigger changes in the company, it's really easy to get confused and basically overcomplicate the implementation process. And it's understandable because there's a lot of information online and it's really hard to understand what are actually the best first steps. So this is what Richard will be talking about today. And I'm happy to see so many people joining our live webinar. So as it's a live webinar, you can always post your questions to the Q&A section. You have a full support team here during the webinar who is going to answer the questions immediately. So if you move your Zoom slider, you're going to notice there's a Q&A section down here, which you can open and post your questions. So a couple of announcements. So first, this session is being recorded. So you will all receive the recording file afterwards. And secondly, please share who you are and what kind of role do you have in your company. Then we know what kind of audience we are talking to. Now, a little bit about Richard. I'm happy to hear him speaking because he is the head of customer success here in Weekdone, and he has around 10 years of experience with OKRs in change management and strategy development. So lucky to have you, and I hope everybody enjoys today's webinar.
Let me unmute myself first of all. Hi, everybody. Just to also add on the end there, if there are other topics you'd like to see us cover, please just drop those in the chat or in the Q&A as well. We'd love to hear what you as an audience would really like to learn about with OKRs for the future. So basically, as Morel said, ask the questions at any time. We will try and answer them live. We're also going to try and group them together, and Morel is going to ask me at the end of the webinar some of these typical types of questions that are coming up from everybody. So super. So let's kind of discuss what we're going to actually cover today, which is all about kind of where do we start with OKRs? How do we keep it simple so we actually succeed going forward with OKRs? How do we make sure we sell it to the organization? How do we make sure everybody in the organization has a common understanding of what OKRs are for? Why are we implementing them, etc.? I think one of the other big areas is making sure that people understand the processes within OKRs, that it is multiple quarters. It's not a one-time thing. And often people put a lot of time and effort into doing one quarter and forget that this is an ongoing process and how to drive it forward. So without any more, let's get started on the webinar. So let's start with the starting questions we need to answer. Well, there's a lot of questions when you're starting out with OKRs, and a lot of times, you know, it starts from what are OKRs, and that can be up and down the organization. How do we align? OKRs talk a lot about aligning, and what does that really mean? Do we even have a common understanding of OKRs? And we see it a lot where different teams in the company have a very different understanding of the purpose and the point of OKRs. And that means it's pulled in different directions if we don't have a common understanding. What levels in the organization should we start with? You know, how do we get started and not lose people or not run before we can walk? Who's championing the OKR process? The OKRs is often changing an organization. It's a cultural change. You have to have somebody that's leading and managing and driving this process. Are we ready for change? A lot of companies would like to change, but we need to be ready mentally and have the time and energy to change. So, are we ready to get started? Well, a lot of questions. Some of them are relatively simple. You know, OKRs are about improvements, not business as usual. We are going to cover it in a little bit more detail later on, but in a sense, OKRs are very simple about what they're there to do. They're there to drive improvements in a business. OKRs about focus on improvements for a quarter. The time scale for OKRs is generally quarterly. And the point is to set and action things so we can see progress within a quarter. A champion needs to be a person with influence. It might be the CEO champions it in a smaller company. It might be the CEO plus another person. It could be an executive, or it could be somebody that has influence in the company. A champion isn't the intern that's just arrived for 4 weeks and give them the project of being a champion for OKRs. The OKR process is likely going to take you 12 months to implement. It needs to be somebody that has the respect, influence, and power to drive through the changes needed. Some relatively simple questions there. The problem is there's a lot of other questions, and a lot of them are much more nuanced and complicated in how do we start. So we're going to kind of try and walk through some of the areas, and we're going to start with how will we structure OKRs? And it's a very common question. We hear it all the time. And it doesn't matter whether you're a 5-10 person startup or you're a 500 person company. Often the questions are all about where do we start? So basically, we've got a structure. We've got a company level, department, teams. And that could be our structure. So the teams are subsets of the departments. And where should OKRs live? Well, it probably depends whether we have those levels, how complex we are. But let's start with, let's say, a small startup. So a small startup maybe has 5, 6, 7, 10 people, or just simply a small company. And we might say, well, we don't need to split things up into teams. It might be we were very cross-functional. As a group of 5, 6, 7, 10 people, everybody kind of works fluidly. So we might be best setting OKRs at a company level for the whole company, 1 to 5, ideally 3, but basically set one set of OKRs that everybody interacts with. That's fine. It's fine to have OKRs at one level with everybody working on them. Now, the next kind of iteration is where we have company level and team level. And actually, this could work for even small startups as well if they're growing fast. I might decide I want to start with a structure where we are maybe structured into sales, marketing, product, and management teams, and we want to start that way. Or it could also be a very large company. It could be 250 people, but you're still very flat. And what you're doing here is you're setting objectives at the company level. You're setting the direction we want to go at the company level. We generally don't recommend setting KRs. Some people will set OKRs at the company level. Usually the problem is how to align them and how to get people to align up to them. Often leadership, and leading means setting the direction we want to go for the quarter. So we're setting it for a narrow quarterly direction. We're sharing it with the teams. The teams write OKRs that align up to the company level. So if the company said we want to focus on A, all the teams are writing OKRs that are a subset of that direction. And the up, down, the relationship between leadership setting a direction and teams setting the OKRs to improve in that direction for their particular team is the way to go. This is a relatively simple structure, but you find many, many companies, even at quite large sizes, will use that type of structure. It could be that we're just implementing it with managers as well at that level. And we're going to come and talk about the levels of people after we've talked about the structural levels here. So let's talk about this example we showed at first. So we've got company, departments, and teams. Now, one of the ways we could do this, we could set company level objectives, the direction we want to go. We could set narrower directed objectives. So narrow down the direction for my particular department. Can I write a subset of the company ones that give and are aligned to the objectives of the company, but they're basically for my department. And then I get the teams to set and align OKRs up to the department objectives, which are aligned with the company level objectives. That's one way. Now, some people will write in a more hybrid style. So we'll have company objectives, team objectives, and team OKRs, but we might also have department OKRs as well. Some OKRs that maybe are overarching of all teams that we need to improve. So kind of a mixed hybrid there. There is other teams that will also have, although they have the structure of company, department, and teams, they actually only have company objectives and team objectives. The department is there as a management level, not an OKR level, not an alignment level. We're always aligning from the teams up to the company level. The problem, of course, different ways to do it. And often as your size grows, the complexity has a risk of growing. So thinking about how do we structure the OKRs? Where do we really need OKRs? It can be simpler than the org structure. Just because you're organized that way doesn't mean OKRs should be put at all those levels. You really need to think about what makes sense. A good example is often product teams. So you see product teams trying to split down OKRs into small groups of front end, back end, or different types of developers. And the problem is that really it's at the higher level, the OKRs, at the big product level, the OKRs probably fit best. And you just have to ask yourself, does it work? Is it the right way to start? Often starting simple and then moving down levels, adding complexity as you go to see, does it still work? Does it still add value? Or are we at the level we need to be is usually the best way to approach it. The other thing you need to consider is the rollout plan. So often where you start with a structure to roll it out, maybe we're simply rolling out to a certain subgroup in the company, and where we're going next with a rollout might make you change the way you start. In the example I said earlier, now we talked about a startup, and maybe we've got 6, 7 people in the startup, but we're growing fast. We're expecting in even a quarter to double or triple the number of people in the company. There, instead of starting just with the company level, we might say, well, we want to start with the team OKRs. There's one person in each of the teams now, but very quickly there's going to be more added. And this allows us to add people in, but keep the alignment and keep the focus on improvements clear. So, yeah, it needs a lot of thought, and really don't underestimate the change needed to do OKRs. You know, there's a lot of things you have to think through. There's a lot of things you have to change, and often trying to keep each one of these elements we're going to discuss as simple as possible means you'll have the biggest chance of succeeding going forward. The next section. So who do we plan to roll out OKRs to? Well, again, we might have a company with departments and teams and maybe some direct teams that report up to the company level. But we've actually got people. You know, we've got a CEO at the company level. We've got department heads at the department levels. We've got team managers and team members in the teams. So that's a lot of people potentially. Where do we start? How are we going to roll this out? Well, one of the ideas could be that we start just with the direct reports to the CEO. So in this case, we've got the CEO, we've got 2 department heads and 3 team managers. So we've got 6 people. We could onboard, train, and learn with those 6 people. And it might be for a quarter, might be for 2 quarters. We might learn until we feel comfortable we're ready to move down another level. It could be that we start with all management levels. And in this case, it's still maybe not so bad. There's 14 people. It might be okay, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's already too big a jump, too many people to get at the same level and developing good OKRs and understanding the processes needed. It could also be we want to onboard everybody in the organization. And just for example, let's say we've got 5 people average. This would be 58 people. Is it possible? Absolutely. It is possible. I've seen companies, and then one company put 100 people on and using OKRs in 4 weeks. Now, saying that, they spent a huge amount of time doing workshops every week for a day a week. And that took a huge amount of time of the people that were training and for the company to train them themselves. So they had to have a lot of time and really put a lot of time and effort in quickly to make it work that way. Do you have that time? Can you afford to have people learning? I always remember from years ago, for those of you that remember Six Sigma, was a big thing, and I was working in a large company where Six Sigma was brought in, and they had a huge amount of people tied up learning Six Sigma. And actually, it set the company back. Although some great things came out of it, we actually spent so much time training and learning Six Sigma, people kind of forgot about what we were really there for in the day-to-day business. So you've got to think about, do we have the time? How much time do we have to tie these people up learning OKRs? Can we do it drip feed, or can we do it by training people with hours of time needed? So often where it starts, when we want to roll out, we really need to think about where we're starting from. Does everybody understand what OKRs are for? We discussed it earlier. Do all understand the OKR method? Can we write good objectives and OKRs? And this is one, we're not going to discuss how to write them in this webinar. Actually, the plan is to do another one in February, which focuses much more on this good writing of OKRs, because it's so important for success. Good objectives and good key results really are the thing that make OKRs engaging and exciting. Done badly, they can make it just feel as something else to do, something else to update, and really people don't see any value in it. So it's super critical. And that's why rolling out slowly and getting each group to understand it is often the best way to do it. Do we have that capacity to lead and manage the change process with the rollout group? Can we manage the training time? Can they spare the time, or how much time can they spare to be trained? We need to be thinking about rolling it by quarter. Bring in a group and run them for 1 quarter or 2 quarters or even 3 quarters until you're ready to move to the next one. Don't try to rush through it. Make sure you've got the level completed and move down. So let's move on to selling the OKR concept. I'll just have a sip of my coffee. So the concept, I mean, in a sense, we've got to get buy-in of the OKRs. And one of the biggest problems, and we regularly see that companies and teams read something about OKRs, but they don't read enough, and they don't fully understand the purpose of OKRs. Unfortunately, the slides on my screen, when I now put it on full screen, seem to have messed up a little bit. I'll fix that in a bit. OKRs are really about improvements. They're not about business as usual. And one of the problems is often people try to jumble everything together. OKRs are often coming out of strategy. If we've got a strategy that's driving us in a certain direction, we'll set OKRs to make the changes, improvements in the business to move towards that strategy. I quite like the sailing analogy. The strategy is obviously a direction, and the OKRs are the sub-direction of how to get there. What we've also got is quality KPIs and growth KPIs. So quality KPI might be customer satisfaction. If we're below a certain level, we need to do something to improve it. A growth KPI might be something that we're trying to change. So could even be the same customer satisfaction levels. We could say, well, we are at X and we want to grow to Y. To do that, just saying that doesn't make it happen. We need to set an OKR to drive improvements that are going to make it improve. So understanding the purpose of OKRs is critical. Those strategy, KPIs quality or KPIs growth, drive the OKRs. OKRs separate the measurement of success from the measurement of actions. This is the outcomes versus outputs. It's a central theme of OKRs. It's critical to understand, but outcomes are often the big problem, that people have never thought about what does success look like? What is the outcome? What is the change or customer behavioral change we need to drive to be successful? What we think about is the outputs. We think about, I'll do a new video, I'll do a blog post, I'll do something. But whether that is successful is not the completion of that output. It's, did it drive the outcome for the business? Did it change the way the customers interacted with our product or company, for example? So understanding outcomes versus outputs, another critical part. It comes back to the way we write OKRs. Many outputs will drive one outcome. We have to do multiple things to make it move. OKRs are about teamwork. We often hear people saying, well, we want OKRs company, team, department, and individual level. Generally, we would say, don't do individual OKRs that are lined up to team, which are lined up to departments, which are lined up to company. One of the points of OKRs is to break down silos, and that even includes silos within teams. If we parcel up the OKRs to individuals, nobody needs to discuss it with each other. The idea is we should have team OKRs, and OKRs are a team sport and teamwork, and we think and move together on them. Individuals do need to action the outputs. They need to do the things that will make the OKRs move, but we treat it as a collective team. Now, personal OKRs for improvement often make sense. The big thing is, when you're starting out, if you can't write good OKRs, don't even do personal OKRs. Start with the team level or start with the manager level and work your way down to the team, but don't try and do all the levels at once. Writing good OKRs is not something that's instant for anybody. The other thing with OKRs is there is safe space. You know, we're meant to be able to be ambitious, experiments, and really a lot of it is about driving learnings to improve. So it's not just about, you know, what do we score? It's really about the space we have to learn and drive improvements for the business. And agile means learning. So OKRs are very much along the agile principles. It's all about learning as well. You know, we really need everybody to agree on why we're using the OKRs and the outcomes we expect from even implementing OKRs. And it's super important when you get started. It's so often you see different teams going their own directions, and very quickly that breaks down and doesn't work for all the teams. The other thing is OKRs are not another name for what you do now. You know, a lot of people will start and the first thing they'll do is say, OKRs are easy. And they'll basically take their project management parts and they'll take their KPIs and they'll try and push them into this OKR, and they'll say, there, we've got measurements and everything's good. You know, in this case, achieve 10x growth, revenue of 10 million, new product launched, and recruit great people. Well, one of them's a KPI, the revenue. Two of them are, you know, binary, done, not done. Yeah, we can kind of measure them, but they're not outcomes. We launch the product. If nobody uses the product, who cares? Recruit great people. What does it mean? And this is kind of common. A lot of people start this way, and understanding that this isn't a good OKR, understanding that OKRs are not there for performance management. They're not tied to compensation is another area. It tends to drive, we want people to be ambitious. We want it as a safe space for trying things, and then we'll tie it to performance and it breaks down. Just shouldn't be done. The OKR process is only part of success. What I mean by that is, okay, we've got an OKR, we've achieved, or it could be we didn't achieve. You know, a lot of people start out with a point of OKRs thinking hitting 60, 70, 80, 100% of the OKR is the purpose. It's part of the purpose. Yes, we always want to achieve success, whatever that means. It could be we're shooting for the moon and we know that there's high risk involved, and getting 30% might have driven the business forward. Maybe we set it too easy and we reach 100% too easily. I think the big thing is to balance up what do we learn with how do we achieve. We could get 20% but learn hugely. We could get to 100% completion but didn't learn a lot that we can carry forward to improve things. So don't just treat them as a KPI in a sense. It's not to be achieved and not achieved. It's trying to achieve it but learning at the same time. We basically all need to agree to understand. We need to have that agreement to make sure. The other one is alignment. So basically, a common issue is people think about alignment in very different ways. A lot of times what people think alignment is drawing lines between groups. So in this case, we've got marketing, for example. Or product needs sales and marketing inputs, and product said, well, for us to develop improve the product, we need sales and marketing inputs on where the product needs to go and what the current customer issues are from those groups. And that's what we need to improve our product. And then we go to marketing, sales and needs product to be launched or working in a way that the customers like it, plus the marketing, the leads, etc. And maybe we need investment from finance to grow the marketing team. And then we come onto the marketing group, and marketing needs product sales input, to kind of help them develop and deliver the right leads, but also the product news and the pitch for the product, etc. And maybe also marketing needs to do marketing campaigns that cost money, or they need more resources. They need finance agreement there. What we end up with is everything linked to everybody. So yeah, in a business, everything is linked to everything. Every team is interdependent with others. But if we just point everybody at each other and say, well, we need this from everybody else, and we just go around in this circle. The thing not to do with OKRs is start with this mindset of saying what everybody else needs to do. What you need to start with is a team department should be able to action their own OKRs without major external resources. If manpower from other areas is needed, it needs to be agreed before the quarter. We need to sit and discuss if we need an increase in leads from marketing, or if we need to increase people to achieve the objective we want. We need to make sure it's agreed with finance. If we don't have the money or we can't get that agreement, we need to change what our plan is. Alignment often can mean making sure the outcomes that you're driving align with the other teams, or don't conflict with the other teams. Or when other teams are explaining what they're working on, you think about how could your OKRs work in parallel with what they're doing. That's often the way true alignment works in companies, is everybody understands the problems and the directions of the other teams, and they make sure that they're somewhat aligned in a similar direction. The other thing is, and we talked about it earlier, one of the best things is just making sure that everything aligns with the company objectives. If we've set a direction from leadership, the way we want to improve, if all the teams are aligned with that, we are probably not going to be very far off of alignment between the teams. So sales, marketing, and product are all driving in a common direction set by leadership. We've already got that natural alignment up to the company level. And it's relatively simple to do that. It's not complicated and it doesn't create problems. I would always say start aligning with a company. Don't even think about doing cross-team alignment until you're 1, 2, 3 quarters into the OKRs. Next section, all about the processes are understood. And why is this important? Well, one of the areas, and a lot of times we've been talking here, how do we get started with OKRs? And a lot of times people put so much effort into starting. They set the company and the team OKRs. This point 1, the starting point, huge amount of effort goes in. And they're exhausted by the end of that. The problem is That's the start, not the finish. We now need execution. We now need to do things. We need to complete initiatives, plans, the items that will drive the OKRs, the KRs, and the objectives forward. We need to kind of meet up weekly as teams, and we need to have this weekly OKR check-in. Did we make progress? What did we do? What didn't we do? What are we going to do for the next week to keep it moving forward? OKRs are quarterly, 13 weeks in a quarter. If you meet up every 2, 3, 4 weeks, you have a risk of being too far behind by the time you realize to be able to action and recover. You really should be sharing mid or monthly your team OKRs with the other teams, and leadership and leaders should be sharing their observations on the OKR process with everybody. This is often the way that alignment comes about. If I understand what the other teams are doing, what's working, what's not working, where their struggles are, and how are they achieving it, it helps me understand their problems and what am I doing? Could I change what I'm doing? Could I help them? Is there ways we could work together better? That mid-quarter or monthly OKR review is a very, very important process that needs doing. A lot of companies don't do it, and that means the teams don't really understand each other. Now, we then get to the end and we do a company-wide review, etc., but we're doing that now to set the OKRs for the next quarter. We have to make sure we've moved through this process with reasonable speed, and we're ready and we have the energy and the thoughts about what to do next for the next quarter. This is what's important. You cannot set OKRs for one quarter, get to the end and go, OKRs work or don't work for us. It will take you 3, 4 quarters to get to that decision point. What you're trying to make sure you do is not try and fix the whole business in one quarter, but you understand OKRs, the OKR process, how to write good OKRs, and slowly improve and grow and step forward. So why do companies fail with OKRs? Big one, different understanding of purpose and fit. Rolling out too fast or without a plan. It's very common that people add everybody in the organization in, give them a 3-minute lecture on what OKRs, and then expect it all to happen. People get lost, everybody's at different speeds, different understandings. It doesn't work. Probably the first two somewhat come down to a lack of leadership or a champion. Having somebody that can actually be the go-to person or somebody that's driving it, or combinations. It often needs top management. So if the champion isn't the CEO or an executive, they need to be involved as well. The champion needs to be involved. Multiple champions in bigger companies may need to be involved as well. Complexity. There's a couple of areas in complexity. One of them is the quantity of OKRs. So those of you that read everything, people can recite the 1 to 3 objectives with 1 to 5 key results, etc. And there's reasons for that. But a lot of people can recite it. When they come to setting OKRs, they say, well, we have lots of things we want to fix. So we have 10 company objectives and we have 20 team OKRs, and then there is no focus, nothing gets completed, everything gets moved a little, and it fails, and everybody gets frustrated. The other complexity is the one I mentioned earlier. This complexity of alignment. You've often seen companies that align things up, down, left, right, and all over the place to the point where nobody understands anything, or teams don't see it as their responsibility to drive the OKRs. They're looking for everybody else in the company to do something to help them. That's not the point of OKRs. That's not really driving improvement. I would always say start simple. It might mean 1 OKR. It might mean 1 OKR for each team. It might mean a set of OKRs just at the company level. It could be a simple team, single objective, and 1 OKR for each of the teams. Think about how to start and keep it as simple as possible. The first quarter, you're not going to fix the company. Try to make sure you get people in the first quarter to understand the purpose of OKRs, how to write good OKRs, etc. Don't try to fix the world. Don't float the ocean in a quarter. It isn't going to work for you. Where do they work? Why do they work? Well, when you set clear, actionable, and focused objectives, and kind of the next two are very much aligned to that. Everybody believes in the objective, whether it's the company objective or the team objective. People have to believe this is a direction that's right. It's one of the reasons team OKRs, the whole team should really contribute to those objectives. You have the team agreeing that that's the important thing to do. The second one is that KRs are outcomes and drive discussions and actions. And that's where writing good key results under good objectives means that they're outcomes. They are not telling people what to do. They're telling people what success looks like. And people then discuss and think through the best ways to achieve those. Try to move them forward, learn, try again, learn, try again, and keep going. It makes OKRs engaging and fun. KRs need to measure the improvements in the objective. So you sometimes see an objective, great objective, and key results under it that are completely different or not really relate to the objective. Everything has to fit together. I have to be able to take from the company down to the team. Team objective has to be clearly written. Key results have to be the measurable outcomes and tie to the objective. The KRs also have to be something we can change with outputs in the near term. A good example of this is, we had some discussions about some marketing OKRs, and the aim was to get, for certain keywords, to get ourselves back in the top 3 rankings. The problem is that likely will take 6 months or 9 months to move you from a certain point for certain keywords up to a top 3 position. So it's no good writing a quarterly KR with that as a measure. However, what we could see is that if we looked at impressions and how many people were seeing our articles, if we could get that rising, that led in the future to an improvement. And that's something that we could action and make changes on today. And we could see the improvement of that within the quarter. And it was leading us to the end destination we wanted. So it's very important to understand measurements. Becoming a data-driven company is often something that comes out of OKRs, but it's something that's another one of these long-term improvements that drives the business. Time, effort, and discussions and practice deliver good OKRs. It really is all about practice. You will never write the perfect OKRs in the first quarter. It takes multiple quarters, whether it's the leadership, whether it's teams, whoever it is. You need to allow that time. You need to spend the time and effort helping people get through the learnings, helping people set the best OKRs, and making them fun and engaging for people to use. If you don't achieve that, it's unlikely you'll really succeed with OKRs. So on that point, just to say, we've kind of finished the webinar here. If you do have questions or you come up with questions later on, we've got the hello@weekdone.com and a LinkedIn address here. If somebody could post those on the chat would be good. And if you want to email me, it's richard@weekdone.com, or Richard-Snaith is my LinkedIn. So we would happily answer any questions on OKRs after the webinar. But Morel, do we have some questions?
Yes. Hi. So we have a couple of questions here that people wanted to know. So let's start. So the first question, why the company needs only objective and not the key results? Why do just objective and team OKRs?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually quite a common question. And what is a key result? A key result is a measurable outcome we want to change, which means we need to action outputs to drive it. usually what actually happens is we don't set key results on a company level. We start to add KPIs in there, is the first problem. So the leader says, yes, we want to drive in this certain direction, and I want more revenue, better profits, and sets KPI numbers for those. That isn't an OKR, even at a company level. That is KPIs that we've lumped into an OKR. The problem is if I'm leading, but I'm telling people what to do, and usually what happens is the key results then get cascaded down to the teams. I'm telling a team what to do. I'm telling them what to do often as a number in that stage. Whereas what I should be doing is saying, this is the direction, this is where I want us to go, or this is what I want us to change, strategic, or these are the KPIs that we really need to drive forward. It could be revenue, but saying we want to grow the revenues or the profits or the number of customers, because actually revenue could be 1,000 different things. We need to narrow it down a bit. And then explaining why is that important to us? Why do we need to do it? And getting the teams to come up with their best ways to drive to that objective works and aligns much better. Separating the KPIs is often the problem. People want to jumble business as usual, improvements, everything together. And that often happens by throwing KPIs, OKRs, everything together, business as usual. And now we have this complex jumbled mess. One of the things with OKRs is keeping it focused on improvements, trying to make sure that as a company, we keep improving, and as teams, we keep improving. And what that really means is we need to spend a percentage of time driving improvements. And that's where the OKRs come about. And often this problem is that company level set OKRs completely often aren't OKRs, and you're often making it difficult for teams to set good OKRs that align up, and you're often setting a bad OKR yourself as a company leader. Does that answer the question?
For everyone who still feel it was confusing, let us know. But I agree when we talk to customers, and they even feel like a little bit relieved when they find out that, oh, we don't need the company KRs. That makes things a lot more easier, because they feel that it's something they need to have, but actually it's hard, and it's like complicates the process. But
I think for a leader,
okay, so
I think sometimes for a leader, setting good direction to go for a quarter takes a lot of thought, time, and effort. To be able to articulate why is it important is really important to the business. Trying to come up with some fake KRs often just ruins it.
And finally, just sit there because all the work happens in the team, so it becomes quite like useless KR in that way.
Yeah.
But okay, so company needs objective, teams have OKRs. Can two teams work on the same KR?
It's a little bit hard to answer that, because it might be, maybe. Usually I would say why. It usually means the OKR isn't set for a team. It's kind of a woolly, fuzzy, loops in everybody KPI. Two teams might be working on OKRs that align with a company direction. We could be working on two teams with different OKRs that are driving revenue. We could have finance looking at reducing the debtor days, and sales improving the close rate, for example, to drive forward revenue. But it often working on the same KR. Who owns it? Who's responsible for it? Or if you have OKRs that are multi-team, meaning, hey, I have this OKR for the quarter, which is it needs somebody from finance, somebody marketing, somebody from product, somebody from sales. Put them together in a team, create an OKR for that team, and then work it forward if you need those people in there. You've got to be very, very careful what you mean by working on the KR. It might be other teams do an action. So it could be that a team does something for another team to help drive a KR forward. It could be, hey, marketing, we need you to do a new landing page for us to be able to do this in sales. Absolutely. What do you mean by work on the same KR? Is it certain plans, projects that other teams are going to do? Is it that everybody's focused on that same KR? So it depends what's meant by that, but trying to make sure teams are somewhat independent is a good starting point. It usually ends up confused if there's not a single team ownership. I hope that answers it. Mirelle, was there any more questions?
Yes, a very interesting question. So what if some teams are like a little bit more excited about the OKRs and some teams are pushing back? What do you think, like, how would you address those different attitudes? Or maybe do you have like an experience with some kind of customers? Are there like certain teams who feel more resistant and etc.?
That's a really good question. And actually, I think you almost see it with every company that you onboard that has multiple teams. You know, you often find people like product teams, which are somewhat used to these agile processes. They very quickly align with the concept of OKRs, and off they go, and they kind of get, well, this is the bigger picture, and this fits in with our Scrum and sprints. This is the high level. That's what we do down here. And then you get other teams that kind of go, well, this doesn't really work for us. Because they haven't really thought about improvements, they're not into that improvement mindset. I don't think there's any particular teams. It depends on the people. I think the thing is you have to treat each team independently and you have to bring them all up to the same level. So if you've got teams that don't understand or aren't writing good OKRs, which is obviously often manifests itself that they don't engage with the OKRs, they don't see the benefit, often comes out of bad OKRs. But you have to bring them up to the right level. And I think you just have to take each team and you have to say, right, we try to bring them up to a level. One of the things that definitely works well is getting each of the teams to share their OKRs with the others in a meeting, you know, that we actually live share how the progress, what do we work on, what's working, what isn't working on the OKRs and on the OKR process particularly as well. So get people to share their understandings. When some teams see what others have done, it can sometimes click on why this works and how this works and why it's not working for them. I think the point is you have to take it as a learning exercise, a change management exercise to get all the teams up to the right understanding level, writing good OKRs, and then it starts to become company-wide.
That makes sense. Okay, and let's go back to like how to set good OKRs, because I think this those questions are always the most popular ones. What kind of like tips or recommendations do you have, or some kind of like methods when it comes to setting good KRs? I think the question is probably, I would assume probably related to how to get from, you know, having all of those initiatives, project ideas, how to get from there to good, measurable key results.
Yeah, I think this is one of the hardest areas where OKRs are challenging you to say, hey, don't tell me what you're going to do. Tell me what success looks like. And that is not the way we've been programmed. We're kind of been told to be efficient, we have to do more of things. What OKRs are saying, well, it's not the quantity, it's the quality. What you do, does it drive the outcome for the business? That's the right outcome that we agreed is what we want to drive forward. And it may be that completing some of these items doesn't work. You know, I put time and effort in, outcome 0. It can also be I do stuff and the outcome's great. I think the thing is that the point is outcome. You know, I have to think about why are we doing this? What is it we want to achieve? You know, and classic examples that you see of write 5 blog posts. That's what we do. Why are we doing it? And I think asking yourself, why are we doing it? Okay, we're writing the blog post because we want to get customers to read them. Okay, but why are we getting customers to read them? And it might come back to actually we're trying to get customers to sign up, or we're trying to get customers to understand the value of our product, or there can be many outcomes of why we're doing different things. And I can't tell you that blog posts are going to link to this and this because it depends on your business, for example. But the outcome is somewhere there, and asking why. And sometimes writing the initiatives and coming back to the KRs and rewording the KRs and think about why are we doing the initiatives and what's the measures that would show us success. Can we write a from value to value for what would be success for us is often what you have to think about. The big thing is, though, it won't happen in one quarter. You won't write perfect OKRs in Q1. It's better to try and get them okay, but it's better to even start to action things to drive something forward and learn from it. I think the big thing people want to do is they want these perfect KRs, and they start to get into it and they understand, well, we haven't got good KRs. Think about it, discuss it with the team, think about how to change them. What would be a better outcome? Use it as a learning exercise. But if you're setting yourself the target that Q1, I'm going to write perfect OKRs, it's not going to happen. We've been doing OKRs at Weekdone 6-7 years, and you know, we can still write a bad OKR. You know, anybody that's been doing it a long time can still write a bad OKR. You know, things that need changing in the quarter. It's not black and white. You're never going to get it perfect. You're always learning. So I think the big thing is asking why. What we are planning to do, I think, is do a session in the next webinar, much more focused on writing. You know, what is it that makes a good KR versus a bad KR? How do we take this process of thinking about initiatives? Because that's often the first thing that comes to mind. It's not bad to come up with initiatives and then roll it back and say, what's the outcome measures? And often this back and forward between what we do or what we think we should do and how we would understand it's successful as outcomes needs to be looped through a few times. And if we do it a few times, we end up with quite okay OKRs.
I agree. It's really like a problem solving exercise that you need to perform in your head like multiple times until it feels natural. But webinar on writing good OKRs, I think that will be good. Okay, so we have more questions in here. Let me see. Okay, even though, you know, we recommend OKRs, we talk about the benefits and, you know, why it's good, etc. There are some like cases where maybe using OKRs is not right. What do you think? What are those instances?
A company that doesn't want to improve and grow, you know, and a company or business or whatever, if you have no ambitions to change things or improve things, don't bother using OKRs. I think the other ones that are hard, there are some businesses, there's not many areas of business that won't benefit from OKRs, but there are sometimes things that are very hard to measure. You know, it could be a design studio. Now we could measure maybe successful customers or happy customers or stuff, but measuring the success of a design, there's some possibilities to do it in some ways, but it might be very, very hard and might be quite subjective. I had one recently, was actually a pharma company, and one of the divisions was very much about taking the drug from a prototype to market, but it was all about, it was an American one, it was all about FDA approval, and it was very much set in stone, all the steps they had to take. Now, they kind of agreed they could think about, could they improve the process they use? But unfortunately, most of that process was very clearly documented by the FDA. So there was very little flexibility to change the way they did things. It was very rigid. Now, as they said, other groups in the company could use it, but maybe OKRs just isn't the thing for them. So there always is places that it's going to be harder. I think the big thing is they are rare. A lot of people say my business is different, or we work differently, or the question is, do you want to improve? Do you have areas to improve in? Do you need to grow as a business? If you do, OKRs will work for you in some way, shape, or form. Will they work in every team? Maybe not.
Okay. So we have here a startup which is growing fast, and they have a growth goal. And the question is, how do you understand what is better to use as a tool for monitoring and achieving growth metrics, KPIs or OKRs?
It's not an or question. The answer is both. You should have both. So if you're a fast growing startup, you should have the KPI set for month on month, week on week, quarter on quarter, whatever you need. Those are what you're setting as what we want to achieve. They're your targets. They're your KPIs, your targets. You should then have OKRs, and the OKRs should be, what are we going to improve and drive forward to achieve those? So they aren't just replicating the KPI numbers. They aren't replicating the growth numbers. How are we going to get that growth? We probably need more customers. Maybe we need more staff. Maybe we need more leads. Maybe, what is it that drives? What are the outcomes we need to improve that will drive the revenue? I think, and I'm not really sure where this misnomer comes from, that KPIs or OKRs. The best companies will use both and always will. They will have the KPIs. They will understand, because that's often measuring the business as usual, the expected growth levels. And the OKRs are there for driving the changes needed to hit some of those KPIs. If we're a startup and we're growing, 10 times a year, and we're doing that through natural growth, we don't have to do anything different from what we're doing today. Fantastic, excellent. We probably don't need an OKR for growth. We might need it for other areas. But usually when you're growing that quickly, you need to be changing and improving things to keep it growing, whether it's recruitment, whether it's leads, whether it's how do we keep and maintain the speed forward. I would never say KPIs or OKRs. I think every time and is the right thing to do.
Agree. I will post an article about KPIs and OKRs into the chat.
Yeah.
So if somebody has a question related to that, I recommend reading it. And if you still have a question, then you can email Richard and he can help you out. Okay. Oh, now we have a question that I know that you and I both are very passionate about. What happens if the company wants to combine OKRs with a financial reward strategy, meaning each employee should have individual OKRs?
Then it's not OKRs. It's just not OKRs anymore. You're not going to get any of the benefits of OKRs. Don't call it OKRs. It isn't OKRs.
Can you explain what happens, basically? Why?
So the idea of OKRs is, we're trying to get people to work together. We're trying to get them to set. And usually what happens when teams set OKRs, people talk about stretch. And actually, you don't need to tell people to stretch. If you say to a team, tell us what you're going to grow and improve and drive forward. Teams naturally in that environment will set high-level goals, or they'll stretch themselves and say, hey, we believe we can double the number of customers we onboard this month by doing this, and things they can do. Great. What happens is, as soon as we tie up to performance, everybody negotiates to the bottom. So every individual tries to make sure they have the least numbers and stuff. They aren't OKRs. They aren't outcomes ever. They're always KPIs or targets or measures. usually what happens is simply somebody has used the word OKRs, which if you read chapter 15 of Measure What Matters even tells you not to do it, and they're not related, but it's just ignored by many people. You can use the word OKRs, but it isn't OKRs in 99.9997% of cases. It's just a word you're using. You know, it's a different way to try and score people. I would definitely recommend, if you can get hold of Measure What Matters, read chapter 15, or just find somebody that's got the book and read chapter 15. It's not a individual performance measure. OKRs are there to drive the performance of the business forward. They get people to think outside the box. They're getting teams to do their best work and align with leadership. It's a very different way of thinking. If you're stuck in the old school individual performance management school and then say you're doing OKRs, you're not.
Okay, thank you. I completely agree with you. I haven't seen it worked out, but I get that sometimes you can use the framework of having an objective and having a KRs, like you can use this kind of like components, but it's not same as the methodology itself basically represents.
And
because
personal improvement OKRs are different. They're not linked up to something above. You could. The problem is though, to write them as OKRs, as outcomes, means you have to, every single person writing those has to understand the OKR methodology well. And that's something 12 months down the road, minimum.
Yeah, I agree. Even though I use them individually, but it's like, it's very separate from team. It's just for myself. I don't share them. I just like the framework. So I use it to develop myself. But from like company perspective, it doesn't matter. It's just for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the next question is a little bit like related to that. And I think the first answer is don't use individual OKRs. But the question is, how to encourage teams to take risks and experiment? What needs to be true to build an agile culture?
Yeah, that's another good question. You know, the funny thing is what we see a lot is teams naturally stretch themselves. When you get them to set, when you literally you put it into their court and you say, right, you come up with the objectives and let's work through a process of setting out what could we do that aligns with the company objective. What are the things, let's say, in this team we could improve that would drive us forward and align with that? And often people will come up with quite good objectives and they'll discuss what it is. Then getting them to set key results and kind of saying, well, the reason we're trying to set stretch is it's not just that this old-fashioned style of, well, set stretch, and if you only reach part of it, you've still improved. It's often about changing the thinking. In OKRs, if I think about 10% improvements, I'll probably make 2% improvements. If I think about 100% improvements, I might not hit it, but I'll probably think very differently about the problem and solutions to fix it than I would if I was just looking for a small incremental improvement. That's what it's all about. How do you encourage teams? I think the big thing is that guys, if we set 100% improvement or we set 10% improvement, you're not, you are the guys that are going to benefit from this. If you 100% hit the 10%, what did you learn? Nothing. Was it fun? Well, no, we just, we didn't do much and we just hit it. It's kind of not interesting for them. And I think teams will naturally, I think we've seen, we've just been through the process, in January of setting Weekdone OKRs. I don't think anybody set easy to hit OKRs naturally. Everybody probably is over optimistic on what they're going to achieve. And I think that's something you learn over time. I think you usually end up spending more time trying to bring expectations down to something a little bit more realistic than you do bumping them up. I think the other part of agile culture is this learning and making sure people understand that it's not just setting the goal, it's what you do, doing what you need to regularly, weekly, learning from it, sharing the learnings, discussing it, and moving on to the next week. Agile really means learning. And those are the important things. And I think when people get into that sort of cycle and that rhythm, it kind of makes setting fun and thinking about how to challenge it and doing it, and it worked and didn't work, and discussing with other team, hey, have you got another idea how to do this? That whole process, it's not just one part of it. Setting needs to go with the executional part, with the sharing and the discussing to make it all work. And agile culture is really learning culture that has to come out of it. And I think sharing learnings is super important. I think, as we've seen, doing a monthly or quarterly review and everybody sharing how they're doing really helps you understand very well how other teams are doing and how yours is aligning, etc. So I think it's not simple, but I think naturally a lot of the teams will, when they understand it's not linked to compensation, they will stretch themselves naturally. If you do set it to compensation, it's a race to the bottom. You know, I've run big sales teams, and every year setting targets for sales teams was my dread, because it was everybody telling me all the reasons why next year would be difficult to hit the target, and everybody trying to negotiate the minimum sales target because it affects the compensation.
Makes sense. Okay, but that's the end of the questions. If somebody still has questions, then let us know. There's an email. You can email to Richard@Weekdone, and you can find us in LinkedIn and send us a message. Either way, we will answer to you. So Richard, thank you. It was a very good webinar, and I also like the questions. So
yes, some good questions.
Thank you.
It's always nice to get some good questions.
Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, as Morel said, we're happy to answer any questions. We are doing more webinars. The next one we plan to do is very much on this writing subject. I know it's one of the most challenging areas, and it is something we want to address more, about thinking about whys and outcomes. It's the one that takes the practice, but there are ways you can help yourself in the way you think and the way you structure the writing of the OKRs. Super, good. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Morel, for hosting, and I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks and goodbye. Video should be with you in 24 hours or less. Thank you. Bye.